Welcome everyone to the Tech Business Roundtable podcast show. This is a podcast show dedicated to shining a spotlight on tech innovators, entrepreneurs, founders, and the compelling narratives behind the movements they've established. I'm your host today, Ryan Davies, and I'm hosting today's discussion on the need for workforce, government, and education to work together and how technology can help solve for this. And today, I am very happy to have Michael Simpson join us. Michael, welcome.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Excellent. A little bit about Michael for our listeners. Michael is a son of educators and corporate entrepreneur, turned 3 times entrepreneur. So this is something that's definitely in his blood from way back. His passion for helping people reach their potential was fueled by his own rise from the ground up to international recognition as a market strategist. He's run marketing and strategy for a billion-dollar product division, growing businesses from $0 to $250 million in 3 years. A CMO for a CRM company that grew from 43 to over $100 million in a year, sold for $263 million. And he co-founded PAIRIN after over a decade as a certified coach and spending 7 years living in Russia, coaching many at-risk young adults to successful careers. And as the CEO of PAIRIN, he works to bridge the opportunity gap for future generations by personalizing career exploration, job matching, and professional development. He's sat in a number of seats, served as the co-chair of the Denver Metro Tech Partnership, a member of the Colorado Succeeds Advisory Boards, has been a speaker at hundreds of events around the world on a variety of topics. And when he's not busy doing all of those things, he's an ICF certified executive coach, an avid cyclist, fly fisherman, award-winning chocolatier. I want to talk about all of these things. There's so much there to uncover, but Michael, thank you again so much for joining. For things I didn't touch on there, tell us a little bit about your background and really what got you into the, into this great area of combining tech with work and government and education together.
Yeah, I grew up in a family, well, when you look at a middle-aged white guy running a tech company, a lot of people draw a lot of conclusions. And he got a Stanford MBA or something to that effect, or grew up in, a lot of privilege. Most all of those things would be wrong in my life. I have a remarkable amount of diversity in my family. I had a father with PTSD, a lot of abuse, people imprisoned in my family. There were individuals with multiple addictions and a lot of financial problems. And that all led me to not be able to follow the traditional path. I had to drop out of community college after 2 months so my brother could continue to go to college. I ended up going out on the road with a band. I was working in bars since I was 15 years old, running sound for concerts. And when I got off of the road and decided to come back home, the personal computer industry was kind of taking off. And I just kind of worked my way in by just being annoying mostly, and just showing up at a retail Computerland store every 30 days until finally they said, we're not giving you a job, but help this guy unload this truck, and we'll pay you hourly to get these 120 computers put together. You have 5 days, just do what he says. And that was 8 o'clock in the morning, and by 8 o'clock the next morning, they had 120 computers that were running, and they gave me a job. I never went home. And so that's how my computer career started. And back then I did what we call today stacking certificates. And because back then you couldn't learn about personal computers in post-secondary. They were teaching Fortran and COBOL back then. That's the gray hair. You can tell how old I am. And so it was because of people seeing skills in me that my social reference wouldn't have ever introduced to me or been able to name, that in their belief in me and their ability to develop those skills and give me a vision for a future that I was able to, advance through companies. I was fortunate enough to work for Eric Schmidt before he ran Google. and work on his speeches on the future of the internet, run new product initiatives for him. And I learned a lot. And he cared more about, what you could do and how you thought, than where you came from. And so that advanced my career. And after, having a successful career as a software executive, and then living in Russia for 7 years, coaching people into successful executive careers, I realized that, I had a need to kind of pull together everything of my life, my ability to understand, software and address problems with that, and also my own background, because when you step off of the linear path that people expect you to take in career, the world kind of expects you to go back to that point and start over and follow that path again. But life doesn't really allow you to do that. And so I created PAIRIN so that people wouldn't spend 10 years in their adult life trying to figure out what they could do, or what they're allowed to do, or what their skills could enable. I believe software can help people do that.
That's incredible. I mean, that's finding a great gap, and like it's being also not just being an entrepreneur and growing a market and industry, but being very philanthropic in terms of how you're doing it. And, you can take a lot away from that, and how you're helping people that have so many obstacles that you faced personally, right? When you talk about that story, that was literally hands-on, building it from the ground up, hands-on, where you're literally putting things together with your hands, getting to where you are today. And with that, we'll talk about your journey and my journey, specifically with PAIRIN as well. But what I'd love to know, again, just how did you get into this area? I mean, you were with CRMs, you're with, like you said, you've been all over the place. What about, connecting education to government to, personal success really drove you into this? How did you recognize that passion?
Well, it was interesting. It was honestly unintentional. The original company was focused on developing a tool to help coaches coach people based on their skills. What people call soft skills, we call them essential skills, because they're hard to measure and they're hard to develop. There's nothing soft about them. And then because of that product, I did some projects with the White House during the Obama administration, and then during the Trump administration, as a part of this thing called the Open Data Initiative, where they were opening up federal data and saying, hey, here's a bunch of data, build stuff on top of it and combine it with your expertise. And so we did these projects. They were free, but it was very interesting. And there was a thing called the Opportunity Project. So we ended up doing a couple of them. We worked with the military spouse employment partnership as part of the Department of Defense. We worked with the Veterans Administration, the Department of Labor. And what was really, every time we would present, there were other people saying, hey, use our data. So I spent hours in the office of the Department of Labor with the two guys responsible for all of the apprenticeship data in the United States. And they're like, what can you do with our data? Because we love the app that you built. And I looked at it and I'm like, your data is an autopsy. It's just a year old. There is no information about present apprenticeships, right? It's kind of late. The patient's already been, reached its termination. We probably need to think about forward-looking data. And so this was a big eye-opener. U.S. Census ended up running this project, and there were, 50 different projects every year. And I realized through this process that the states and the federal government, they're really difficult. It's really difficult for them to connect things across different agencies because they live in these silos. And then the state of Colorado, God bless them, came out with a request for information. It was part of a multi-agency task force. And they had worked for a year and a half or so. There's probably 30 people on the task force. And they came out with this request for information, which usually they come out with those when they don't know what's possible, but they like, hey, we have some ideas. What could you do? And the concept was, what if we could connect any person at any stage of life with any need to just the relevant data, the relevant tools and resources and websites, forms, whatever, but not all the rest of the stuff. And then as you work with them through their life, you can connect to them to more relevant things as more things become relevant. And I looked at that, and I looked at my whiteboard about what we were trying to build, and they look similar. So we responded to that RFI, having only built about 10% of this thing. And then about 6 months later, an RFP came out, which looked a lot more like our RFI response. So we responded to that. And then while we were waiting to hear back from Colorado, I met the head of workforce for the governor's office in Virginia at a Skillful event, Skillful based here in Denver, as part of the Markle Foundation. And he was complaining about they had this RFP out, a bunch of money from the U.S. Department of Labor, and they been waiting for 8 months, and nobody really could convince them that they could do what they wanted done. And he described it to me, and I just picked up my phone and I emailed him our response to Colorado without the funding, finances. And the next day he found me at this event, and he goes, "I just emailed you 5 vendors. Please, within a week, tell me which of those vendors you want to give 10% of this business to. And the business is yours. I've already canceled the RFP." So we won this business just by understanding what their issue was, not having built it yet. And then 10 days later, we won the Colorado deal. We shipped both of those July 1st of 2019. So that was several years into our company. Our previous product is now less than 1% of our revenue. Our entire company pivoted into government basically because I like huge problems, and I'm very persistent about solving big problems. My wife would say that it took her 14 years to marry me. Took 13 years to date me. So persistence is something that, I was born with and I've developed as an entrepreneur.
That's incredible. So tell me a little bit more about that journey, and our listeners more about that journey, because Michael, I think they would love to hear a bit about how you were able, like you said, to pivot and take such a different direction based on identifying need and identifying what people were looking for. And that I think a lot of people try to jam themselves into a market, or they try to force themselves to say, we could fit that, like you said, they got constant responses. These RFPs are falling totally flat, going, nobody can convince us what we're looking to do. But you just were able to listen and understand. Take our listeners through a bit of that journey, and so you could kind of guide them for that. How can they recognize those opportunities, and how is that information so valuable from that perspective?
Well, I think that the key for entrepreneurs' perspective, one of the first things is it helps to have personal experience with the problem. A lot of folks will follow a formula, and they can do that. That's better for a growth business. But starting a business, to have that empathy for the problem, for the people that you're trying to serve, is really, really key. And so I understood a lot, not all. Every heart knows its own pain, right? And so you can't ever fully understand what anybody else's experience is, but you can understand, what yours was, and then try to learn from there. And so we ask a lot of questions. We did a great deal of discovery. We did over 300 hours of meetings with subject matter experts. Basically, there were 23 different personas. But because if you think about, the state serves everybody, probably not you, right? Or me at this stage of life. But when COVID hit, guess what? People like you and me were served by the state,
right?
And we're out of work, and they needed help. So typically people think the state is just the disenfranchised populations, but there are times when the state has to serve everybody. And so we learned that through this process of, meeting these subject matter experts, people who work with homeless youth, people who work in corrections, in the pre-release program, system is used in all 15 prisons in the state of Colorado. It's also used with ninth graders who just feel like they're in prison, but they're really not. But the concept was really interesting, is that we realized that to do this, you couldn't build a software application per se to do it, because a software application by its normal design has guardrails, and it basically is, we're going to address this type of person and these types of problems.
Right.
And so we had to step back and say, are we really building an application, or are we building a navigation layer? And then we thought about it. So I'm a coach, a International Coaching Federation trained coach, and I know one of the best questions you could ever ask anybody is, what do you want? Full stop. What is the outcome that you want, either from this individual conversation or for the long-term goals that you happen to have? And then once you get agreement on the outcome, then you can set goals to accomplish the outcome and steps to accomplish the goal. And I sat back and I thought, what decision in your life can't fit into that model? What do you want? What goals do you need to set? What steps you need to take? And so we decided that, what if we just built a framework called Outcomes, Goals, and Steps? Very non-creative branding right at that point, because that was just what it was, but it was descriptive. And what if we built a framework to do that didn't really require any software coding, but it was just completely administratively controlled to build any workflow to do anything? And that's essentially what we started with, was this concept of we just need to know how people interacted, how professionals helped folks, and if they had unlimited time to spend with them, what would they do? We could put that in a workflow, instead of saying, hey, go to this website and click this URL, but ignore this part, right? And just read this and take this assessment, and then I'll debrief it for you, and then do this and make sure you download this report. What if you just put it all in a workflow? And it's transformational.
Amazing. Let me ask a little bit about the ICF certification, things like that, because again, a lot of our listeners, I think, especially when you're building a business from an entrepreneurial standpoint, that coaching is critical. That where do I start? That how do I get answers? How did you get involved with it? And when you're going through, what would you recommend to people to say the importance of finding that coach, that right mentor, that right person to help them shape their future in their business?
Yeah, I stumbled into coaching too. I mean, so after that company sold in 2001, there were a lot of companies that were struggling later in that year, because that was just the tech crash. And so we sold in the beginning of the year. And I'll take credit for that. I ran strategy. So I was like, we got to sell the company before this happens. So I did predict it, part of that. And so I was working with an ex-employee of mine, started a marketing consulting firm, a marketing services firm, and she would bring me in to work on product strategy with founders. And then I would find that I was working with the founder, and I ended up talking to them about their marriage and, why are you so depressed, and what needs to change. And so I found that I was consulting CEOs that had hit that $10 million, $25 million threshold, that plateau, where they needed to fire themselves from either some or all of their jobs, their whole company, because they were the problem at this point. And then I'm like, I'm coaching more than consulting at this point, and I actually like it better. So I went and got certified, got trained, and then learned and developed that. And that's how I started to coach. When I started this company, I met up with some other founders that I started to get to know at different events, and just said, I would ask when I meet someone that I thought was really smart and helpful and kind, I would say, hey, is there anybody that you would recommend that I talk to? And I would go talk to that person. Eventually, I got hooked up with this group called the Denver Private Founders Forum. And you don't know about it because it is still private. And they were at one time 35 different vendors. And the founder of Havenly and a whole bunch of other folks were in this group. It's wound down because most of the companies have either sold or been acquired or something. But we still get together periodically. And that group was transformational. There was so much expertise in that group. We would kind of coach each other all the time. And if you had a problem, there were folks, awesome people like Tom Higley and others that would say, "Hey, let's go get coffee," and they'd sit down and help as best they could. And that created in me a desire to pay it forward, an obligation, a moral obligation to pay it forward. So, I meet with, I'm a what they call mentor in numerous tech accelerators like Techstars and others. I do 3 of them. And, basically anybody says, "Hey, will you look at my pitch deck?" I typically do, and at least do 1 meeting with everybody.
Amazing. And I think, invaluable pieces of information here in very simple terms, right? Like what do you want? And who should I talk to? And things like that. The very simple, 5-word questions that you can ask to grow your business and to learn more and expand. One of the things that comes to mind as well, just speaking about your background, your industry, everything you're in, a lot of public service work, a lot of government work, trying to connect, again, workplace, government, education, tying that together. I've done a lot of private and public sector work. Public sector keeps me up at night because the red tape and everything can be so much heavier, right? The shifting goalposts depending on who's where and in power, whatever it is. How have you managed to navigate those waters and been so incredibly successful in taking on that? I know a lot of businesses have trouble saying, "I'm not going near public," because it's just its own entity, right? Its own beast.
Well, to be honest, I think twice about it often. Like, was this the right thing? And there's no other place that I know where you don't get to talk to people during the process of them selecting your product. And so you have to be a good writer and a good storyteller. But then once you're in it, it's remarkable how the rules change. They function within this constrained procurement environment, but then they can often go out and change those rules afterwards, right? So, we changed our mind, and so now we want to change the requirements, and that doesn't work in corporate world. In the corporate world, you say, "Well, that's going to cost you," and in the state environment, it's not as easy, and so and sometimes still you have to do that, but there's this I don't know. It's difficult. It is as difficult as people say. It helps to have a lot of cash reserves because the states can just say, "Oh, we're going to delay 6 months," and there's just not a sense of urgency. And I've had situations where I tell my board we're going to have this revenue because I have a signed contract and everyone's agreed to it, and then I don't have that revenue for 6 months. And what do I do with that cash? I've put a lot of resources on this. So yeah, it is as painful and as difficult as anything you could imagine. But the system we're right now replacing the state of Colorado, by the time we've replaced it, will have been there 28 years. It's written in Fortran.
That's beyond legacy at this stage, I think. I don't
The
even
lady that manages it, that built it, has been trying to retire for years.
I was gonna say,
And so, I mean, it's sticky. Like, if you can last through the procurement process, the contracting process, and actually get it deployed with everybody agreeing, then it's very, very stable revenue. And you can grow from there. It's just getting through that first year or two in each of those first major deals that is the really difficult part.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, same thing, right? I know so many times with public service, you go into procurement with corporate and these people are laser focused on exactly their needs and wants, and it's done. You go in with public service, and so many times I got people coming back going, "I don't know, I just got told to ask for something. I don't know anything about this area," right? Like, they're kind of, they don't know what they don't know, and there's a lot they don't know sometimes. So it's challenging. It's a lot of that goalpost shifting and things along those lines. And talk to me a little bit, tell our listeners a little bit about education. Again, the rewarding side of what you've done. being able to help so many people, and just your journey through that as well. Cause I think that's a big thing. A lot of people go into business because they want to be part of something different, not the big corporate machine, but have that rewarding sense of self of what they've created. So tell our listeners a little bit about that journey and why education for you.
Well, I think of it more as that nexus between workforce and education.
Perfect. Yeah.
And because education for how long? Decades. The goal was a college degree, and that degree you'll figure out in college or after college. Once you get the degree, that's the goal, and then you'll figure out your career. And 40 some odd % of people change their majors in their first or second year. Countless millions and millions in debt. I dropped out of college. My wife had a full ride scholarship playing basketball for Kansas State University, so she didn't have to pay for college. So our lives were saved from, to some degree, from that kind of lifelong debt that just saddles you. And then you see organizations like Western Governors University and others that are allowing people to get bachelor's degrees cheaper. But there's so many great programs. In the first 5 years of our company, we started to work with a lot of great programs like Cross Purpose, Perkins School for the Blind, Hope House for teen moms, and a bunch of these types of organizations that were trying to coach people with employability skills. And you get kind of wrapped up in their lives, right? And we saw that, just like with me, being able to get a certificate or another certificate, those small goals that all you got to do is take this course, and if you pass this test, then you get credit for that. From an employer who cares and who believes more about what you can do than where you came from. And so that was my objective. For some people, like I've had 3 PhDs that work for me in this business, right? So I don't have a problem with education. I just want your education to be what is right for you. And I want it to be relevant for the path that you want to take. Because education for the sake of education is debt for the sake of debt, right? It's not really a means to a particular end that you desire. And so it's best to be able to identify opportunities outside of what your social reference, instead of like, following your father's or your mother's footsteps, or I see people around here doing this, and so I want to do that. Introducing people to more things. What I believe is that the lines between work and education shouldn't just be blurred, they should be obliterated. That our education system should be teaching people the skills for work, and all the other things that they need to learn around that. But in the context of work and getting things done, they need to be introducing them to work. They need to have them trying out work. And so it's interesting when you go to a lot of places in Europe, you try to get into like an engineering school, and they're like, well, where have you worked in engineering? Like, why would we want to let you into our engineering school? You have no work experience. You don't even know if it's right for you. And in America, it's like, I want to go to engineering because my dad went to engineering and I'll figure it out, right? It's not a good model. So that's, I want people to live fulfilling lives. I believe that everybody was designed for a purpose, and there is this amazing place that you find yourself emotionally, spiritually, relationally, when you're activated by your work. And it kind of fills a hole in you instead of creates one. And most people, look at their work as it's just sucking stuff out of me rather than giving stuff back. And I believe that, finding the right work is incredibly fulfilling.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I mean, I've done a few different things before, and I'm in a place now where I actually enjoy getting up in the morning and doing things and talking to people like you and learning more, and as opposed to feeling like you said, that Sunday night anxiety of, oh, that's it, that's the weekend, it's back tomorrow, and here we go again, right? So I completely connect with you on that one, and understand that passion drives you. With that said, tell everybody a little bit more about how they can, about your projects, how they can find you, how they can connect with you. I think you're just an incredible wealth of knowledge, and I'd love to get some people to be able to, again, reach out should they need to, and get your guidance.
Well, they could do all of those things at PAIRIN.com. They can PAIRIN.com, and they can find my contact information there. They can find my LinkedIn profile and learn a bit about our company. I would encourage anybody who's interested in learning more about what we're doing to look at our blog and look at our news section on the website. We're incredibly proud of our culture at this company. We worked really, really hard at it. After years as a coach, it was after a coaching session with someone that I coached for 3 years who actually lives in Tel Aviv and is there right now. And I'm in touch with regularly, have a lot of friends and people I've coached that are living in Israel as well, and in Haifa and other places. So it's a difficult time right now for them. And at the end of this coaching session, I was telling them about this idea for this business. And I said, I don't know if I want to do this. I like coaching. I'm living in the mountains. And he said, Michael, for years, you've been helping leaders develop good cultures and talking to them about, building that ultimate culture that they want to build in their company. He said, maybe it's time you showed them. And I went, and the student becomes a teacher. And it was really, that just haunted me. And, I kept telling people what was possible. I complained a lot about my previous, bosses and leaders and companies, and said, gosh, if they had only done this, if they'd only done this, if they didn't do this. And so that's kind of the last straw about how PAIRIN was built. It was to fulfilling a vision of what I thought could be, and how people could be treated, and respected and developed inside an organization. And I'm very proud of what we built. So you'll learn a little bit about that in our blogs and our news. And
it's fantastic. I'm going to put you on the spot already right now, because I think I could tell anybody who's listening right now, myself included, I think we got another topic about building culture at a building culture from the ground up as well, because there's such an importance behind that. And again, it's a soft thing that happens, which is really hard, as you mentioned, in the background, and takes its own massive amount of lift and talent to be able to do that. And I guarantee you, everybody, including myself, I'd love to have you back talking about that specifically, because it's a lost, it's not even a lost art. I think it's an art still so far from being recognized as of how important it really is, and would love to continue on that topic as well.
A couple of MBA groups, teams have done studies on our value creation model, because our executives did not create our values. Our team created our values years after we launched the company. And that was transformational.
Incredible. Yeah. With that, I think that's a great segue for us to sign off here. And Michael, thank you so much. I want to take a minute to thank you for this amazing podcast on the workforce, government, and education need to work together, and how technology can help solve for this. We went far beyond those borders. I think even that was just a tip of the iceberg, and we went far deeper into it, and so much that I think our listeners can take away. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you.
And I want to thank our listeners as well. We cannot do what we do without you. Please don't forget to share, great podcasts like this, feel free to reach out to people like Michael as well. Really grow your business. That is what we're here for. And until we meet again with another amazing TBR episode, I am your host, Ryan Davies. Stay persistent out there and stay curious. Thanks everybody for listening. Take care.